Hi, this is Elwyn Robinson, and in this video you're going to learn about how to clear the stagnation in your intestines and liver before they undermine the health of your whole body. And in this video you're really going to discover why a lot of ancient Eastern systems, like the ancient Taoist system in China and the ancient Ayurvedic system in India, really believed that the digestive system, and specifically the area around the small intestine, they really saw as the root cause of disease throughout the whole body. And this is one of the very few videos that I do that's a root cause video, and that's why I spend longer addressing it, because there are a myriad different forms of illness. You know, there are millions of different categorizations of disease, the different ways that the body can ultimately go wrong, and different ways of categorizing it. But from my experience and my understanding, there's actually only very few root causes. And this is one of them, so it's really important to focus on. Now, before I get into this, I have to say this is not medical advice. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a healthcare professional. You've got to run everything by a healthcare professional before you actually do it. And I'm assuming, as I'm teaching this, that you have whatever issues you have, you've already been to a doctor about them. Either they haven't been able to help, or they've only been able to help as much as they can. And so this is a next level or alternative approach, which for me has actually worked. And that's why I'm so excited to be able to share it with you right now. And for me to really do this subject justice and teach you in a way that's actually useful to you, it's absolutely critically important to understand the digestive system. So let's understand how your digestive system actually works, or at least should work first, and then we can understand the different ways it goes wrong and why that can create so many problems. So how does digestion work? So first of all, digestion begins in the mouth, right? You're chewing your food, saliva is produced in your mouth, and that saliva actually begins to break down the food that you're digesting. Specifically, the digestive process in the mouth is more for digesting carbohydrates. There's an enzyme called amylase, for instance, that the more carbohydrate you consume, the more of that you will produce per meal. And so that starts to break down the food. However, it's still going to pretty much look like food if you were to take it out of that part of the process until it goes down the esophagus and the trachea and enters into the stomach. Okay, so the stomach is, a lot of time when we talk about digestion, we talk about the stomach. We even, we say I've got a stomach ache, and we kind of clutch down here. The stomach isn't here, right? That's the small intestine, roughly. The stomach is up here. So that's where the digestion actually begins. And those of you who've had acid reflux and heartburn probably know where your stomach is, but a lot of people don't. So that's where the digestion really kicks into gear. So the stomach is a muscle that's kind of squeezing and breaking down the food, but the main process isn't manual. The main process is with acidity, right? So that acidity breaks down the food. Some liquid is absorbed here, some minerals are absorbed here, but not a lot is actually absorbed here. The main thing that we're doing here is breaking things down. The acid that actually breaks the food down here is hydrochloric acid, and that's specifically important and relevant for proteins. Okay, so in order to be able to digest proteins, and proteins are absolutely crucial for your health and your well-being, right? So from there, now you also have this very large organ up here called the liver, right? So the liver does a ton of different jobs, which we won't go into, everything that it does, but just a couple of things. It helps your liver detoxify. It helps your body regulate your metabolism, regulate your hormones. It does a lot of different jobs, but the thing it does that's most relevant when it comes to digestion is it produces a substance called bile, okay? So bile is an emulsifier of fat, and it helps to break down fat so that you're actually able to assimilate and absorb it. So it's most relevant for fat, but it's also relevant for protein to some degree as well. So just to recap so far, we've got the stomach that produces a lot of acid. That's especially relevant for the digestion of protein. We've got the liver, which via the gallbladder, so the liver is this huge organ here. Most people have no idea how large it is. It's around here. Okay, it's 4 times the size of your heart, really big organ, and it can even get bigger if it's dysfunctional and if it's blocked, which of course we're going to get into. And then the gallbladder, this little organ here, actually takes the bile from the liver and squeezes it into the digestive tract. So once the food has gone into the stomach here, the gallbladder releases the bile. And a lot of people think bile is acidic, some people think it's alkaline. Overall, it's actually pH neutral, right? So we have a very strong acid in the stomach, we have a roughly neutral digestive juice, digestive liquid here, that then squirts into this area here called the duodenum, right? Now, the one other organ that's supremely relevant to the pancreas that we need to talk about before we get into the main area, which is the small intestine, is the pancreas. So when it comes to the pancreas, a lot of people think of it as the key to blood sugar, which of course it is. So the pancreas produces insulin, which helps you to uptake and regulate your level of sugar. So, you know, we said the stomach is most relevant for protein, the liver is most relevant for fat, while the pancreas is most relevant for sugar. But the pancreas does two other jobs. One is that it produces enzymes, right, which help to break down the food, and it helps to produce enzymes that break down all types of macronutrients, protein, fat, carbohydrate, various other minerals, vitamins, all the rest of it, right? But the other job that it does that I see almost no one focus on, that's crucially important, is that the pancreas, when it's, so the gallbladder squirts this bile juice into the duodenum as the food is going past, but the pancreas squirts this pancreatic juice, which is a combination of enzymes, as we just talked about, but also sodium bicarbonate, which is a really powerful alkalizer. Now, the reason why I'm emphasizing it's so important, other than the fact that it's rarely focused on, is because, think about it, your food's gone in, it's become very acidic in the very highly acidic stomach, right? Way more acidic than lemon juice, your own stomach juices, just as a point of reference. Then it has this pH neutral stuff squirted onto it. So if that were it, then it would go into the small intestine and be very acidic, right? But that's not the case. You have your pancreas there to produce enough sodium bicarbonate, or you should do, and of course this is a crucial point, to help to roughly, and it depends, but roughly balance the pH, or at least make it significantly less acidic so it doesn't burn the small and irritate and cause inflammation and all the rest of it in the small intestine, right? So now we get to the small intestine. So the small intestine is where the vast majority of absorption of nutrients actually occurs, or at least should occur. So the small intestine is a very interesting organ. It's around 30 feet long. It's got 150 corners, and it's absolutely covered with these little things called villi, which we have a little bit of an example of here. So little things that stick out. They're like little tendrils in reality, and they're soaked in blood. And what those little tendrils are supposed to do is to pick up the piece of food which are now broken down, right? 'Cause they've been broken down by the stomach acid, broken down by the saliva, broken down by the bile, broken down by the pancreatic juices. So now the nutrients should be in a place, and they're also being broken down by the actions of the small intestine, and they're at the place where your body should be absorbing it, okay? So absorbing the actual nutrition, absorbing the amino acids, absorbing the sugars, absorbing the fats, absorbing the vitamins, the minerals, the everything, pretty much, right? So that should be being absorbed in that area. And then, once that's happened, it goes, and again, this is like a fairly good illustration of the small intestine, because it's normally visualized as like one little thing at the center. But the reality is you've got small intestine like all throughout this area, even as low as the waist, right? Like it's actually distributed a lot further and wider than you may suspect, generally by looking at biology pictures. But that's a good kind of showing of what it's like. Lots of corners, lots of folds, and it's small, right? It's maybe this kind of diameter, and that's, you know, if it were inflated, but in reality, you know, it's squished against different things and all the rest of it, and it may well be blocked. And of course, that's what we're going to talk about. So from there, it goes via the ileocecal valve into the large intestine. So the large intestine is shorter. It's still around 6 feet long, so still, you know, significantly big. And, you know, around, it depends on the person, as with the small intestine, but it's significantly wider. So it's probably got a similar level of volume inside it as the small intestine, even though it's a lot shorter. And so this valve is meant to keep things from going back into the small intestine, right? So it's a one-way valve. It goes into the large intestine and then it carries on moving through. And you have the ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, and then eventually it goes out. So the main purpose of the large intestine is that it absorbs water and absorbs various other minerals as well, and some other nutrients, but those are the two key things. So what we didn't talk about yet, we talked about how the food goes through and ultimately the waste goes out, but we didn't yet talk about how the nutrients actually get distributed. And so we talked about the villi, these little tentacles inside your small intestine, which is this, the long intestines that are around the navel area, kind of centered in the navel. We talked about how they absorb the nutrients, but then what? Well, then what? It actually goes up via the mesenteric system. It goes into the liver, and then the liver actually processes these nutrients and distributes them in turn throughout the body via the arteries and veins. I think this is one of the reasons why in the Taoist system the liver is referred to as the general of the body. Like the heart they call the supreme commander or the boss, the president, but the liver is the general because it's the one that's actually like organizing all the troops and making sure everything is in the right place. So that's the basic process in a nutshell. Now, given everything I've just said, if you were to think of, and things could go wrong at any level, right? People have problems in every single one of these organs. But if you were to think of an area where problems would be most likely to start on average, what area would you expect would be the most likely to have issues? Would it be, the stomach? Maybe, right? Would it be the liver? Maybe, especially if you're drinking a lot of alcohol and taking a lot of drugs, right? Would it be the pancreas? Maybe if you're eating a lot of bad quality sugar, if your digestive system is continually overloaded with acid. And by the way, this is something that's definitely very likely to happen if you eat a diet with too much protein, especially animal protein. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying if you were to eat too much for you, whatever that may be, then your body's got to overcreate stomach acid in order to try and break it down. And then the pancreas has got to, in turn, try and overcreate alkaline constituents, specifically sodium bicarbonate, to balance that back out again to some degree. So that can go wrong. But the area where things really are most likely to go wrong, initially, in my experience and from my understanding, is the small intestine. Not even the large intestine. So there's a lot of focus in detoxing and cleansing about clearing out the large intestine. And yes, it's true. If you're constipated on a regular basis, this is no good for health in ways that we'll describe in a second, right? But think about it. We're talking about stagnation and blockage here, right? So everything I've just mentioned, where would you think stagnation and blockage is the most likely to occur? Could it be the tube that is 30 foot long, has 150 corners and is relatively narrow? Makes sense, right? So people talk a lot about colon cleansing and clearing out the large intestine, but really the area that's most likely to have the issues is the small intestine. And so how does it go wrong? Well, I've given you a couple of little examples and previews already, but let's get into now the root causes of everything that can make things go wrong so that then we can focus on how to, and well on into the next page, how we can actually address and resolve these issues to increase your quality of life and to increase how long you live. Just before I get into that, I want to say one thing, handle one objection that I hear all the time. And this is to preempt, you probably don't have any objections yet because everything I said is completely obvious mainstream science and biology. But before I get into some of this, and especially my recommendations, I just want to clarify. The most common objection that I hear to the recommendations I have is, no, it's not natural. But here's the thing. So yes, certain things that a lot of what I recommend will be natural, but certain things that I recommend will not be quote unquote natural. But here's the thing. Nothing about the way that you live your life is natural. Almost everything that I'm going to describe here in terms of the root causes are you living unnaturally. Even examples like the fact that we have electric lights, the fact that we have media, the fact that we can fly across the world, the fact that we can be completely isolated from sunlight, the fact that our feet never touch the ground. Like, every part of our life and our lifestyle is unnatural, including, for most people, the way that we treat our digestive system is completely unnatural. So the whole objection of I won't do this thing to resolve the state I'm in because it's unnatural, when the state you're in the first place is caused by how utterly unnatural your lifestyle is, doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm willing to do all this stuff to ruin myself, which is unnatural, but I won't do anything to fix myself unless it's 100% natural. Doesn't make sense, right? Doesn't make sense to me, so I just want to give that as a little warning before we get into it. So let's look at these different things that we do that are unnatural and fundamentally causing this problem, which can ruin the health of our whole body. The first thing is eating too much, right? Up until relatively recently, and for some areas of the world this is still the case, but for those of us in the developed world, until relatively recently, like in the last 100 years or so, there was not that much food. And so we had to ration. Like, even my grandparents talk about that, after the Second World War, like rationing. So we used to have to ration how much that we ate. We just we couldn't afford, there wasn't enough food for us to just eat as much as we wanted whenever we wanted, right? Now there is. So we have this situation, we have this problem where we're eating too much. And when we eat too much, what that does, if you refer to what we just talked about, it strains everything we just talked about. It strains the body's capacity to create enough saliva in the mouth. It strains the stomach's ability to create enough acid in the stomach. It strains the liver's capacity to create enough bile to digest the food that we're digesting, as well as distribute nutrients. Strains the pancreas's ability to create digestive enzymes and sodium bicarbonate and insulin. And I could go on and on throughout the whole thing. Every part of the system gets strained. And of course, specifically, the small intestine, right? If the small intestine has too much in it, what did we just say about it? It's 30 feet long, it's got 150 corners, on average, of course. So if you overload it, is there a chance that a blockage may start to form in there? Certainly, when you take into account everything else we'll talk about here, the answer is yes. It's a very big chance. So eating too much is definitely one of the root causes. And by the way, as I said, up until recently, most people couldn't afford to eat a lot. But what about even our ancestors, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, right? It's true that sometimes they would binge if something were available, and that is our instinct. Our instinct is, if food is available, we binge on it because it may not be available tomorrow. That's our hardwired programming going back to hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years of evolution. Now the thing is, there used to be times where we had a lot of food and then times where we didn't, right? So we would gorge ourselves when we could, and then that would give us enough to sustain us during times when there was nothing, when otherwise we would starve to death, right? But that's not the situation, again, the vast majority of people watching this are going to be in, and so that's the challenge. So eating too much, next, eating too often. And this goes hand in hand with eating too much. Now, if you're like an athlete or a bodybuilder, if you're working out very intensely, exercising very intensely, many hours a day, or even if you have a very physically demanding manual job, if you want to eat, every few hours, great, good for you, right? Because that's natural. The natural amount of time that we'd be on our feet, walking and moving and lifting stuff and climbing and all the rest of it, for again, most of our ancestors would be anything from 4 to 8 hours a day. Most of us are lucky if we get 20 minutes a day of being anything other than sedentary, right? One of the reasons why I do these videos standing up rather than sitting down, which I guess would be more comfortable, is because every time that I get the opportunity to move, I do, right? So this is one of those opportunities. I'm standing up and I'm moving rather than sitting down. So eating too often, unless you have that very active lifestyle, basically strains all the organs like we just talked about, right? But in a slightly different way. Eating too much means that all those organs are overloaded temporarily, which is like an acute stress to them. But eating too often means that they never get a chance to rest. Like with the liver, for instance, if you have a tendency to have a weaker liver than the average person like I do, if I were to eat too often, my liver specifically wouldn't have a chance to build up enough bile again to process the next meal. And then I would get indigestion, bloating, all kinds of issues, right? So this is really important to understand. You could eat really small portions. I don't eat too much, but if you're eating every 2 hours, or if you're just constantly grazing throughout the day, that strains the organs as well. Now, you might have thought I was going to start with this one, eating the wrong foods, right? I want you to note that with everything I just said, even if you're eating quote-unquote healthy diet, you're still, these things are still an issue, right? Let alone an unhealthy diet. When you're eating an unhealthy diet and you're eating too much of it and you're eating it too often, that's where the problems can really begin. And now when I say wrong foods, there are some things that are obviously wrong, right? Like if you take most fast food, highly processed food, anything where you look at the ingredients label and you don't know what half of it is or any of it is, frankly, that's definitely going to be bad, right? If it's full of chemicals, if it's highly processed. But the wrong food doesn't just mean that. There are things that are perfectly good for some people that may be wrong for you, and there may be things that are perfectly good for you that are really bad for some people, right? And I'm not just talking about allergies and intolerances. I'm talking about the understanding that there are different body types that have different digestive systems. Some people have stronger liver than others. Some people have stronger pancreas than others, etc. And then when you're eating the kind of foods that are incorrect for your specific body type, that puts a strain on them as well. So obviously, definitely bad foods, processed food, but even quote unquote good foods that really help someone else to thrive may not be the thing that's helping you and may be irritating your internal organs. Another little example for me, because I have that weak liver that underproduces bile compared to the average person, if I eat a lot of fats, even if they're totally healthy, high quality fats, it still puts a strain on my whole digestive system, right? For someone else, it may be sugars, right? If they have naturally a weaker pancreas than average, then if they eat too many sugars, then that can cause a problem. So, I could go on and on with examples, but that's the basic understanding, right? Wrong foods, as in bad foods, but also just wrong for you. And then also eating at the wrong time. Now, I hate to say this because I'm someone who likes to stay up late, and sometimes I like to work late, and so I get hungry at night, but eating at night is generally a bad idea, especially overeating at night is a really bad idea. But for some people, and again, it depends on the type of digestion system you have, eating at the end of the day is generally not good. Some people say that it's best to have the biggest meal at the beginning of the day. Some people say it's the best to have the biggest meal at the beginning of the day. Most people agree that it's not best to have it at the end of the day, but even some people might say it's better to have it at sunset, that kind of time. I don't think anyone thinks the best time to have a big meal is in the middle of the night. So timing is important too. So the next root cause is oxygen deficiency. And this is one of the root causes, along with stagnation in the intestines and liver. This is one of the key root causes that I focus on, which if you address those very few root causes, everything else tends to get resolved. Everything else tends to fall into place. So oxygen deficiency, in order to understand that more, definitely check out the video below, which will go into explaining that in a lot more detail. But just in a nutshell, understand that if your cells don't have enough oxygen to create enough ATP to meet your energy needs, ATP is basically just energy. It's where matter meets energy, literally, from a biochemist point of view. So in order to have the energy that you need enough oxygen. When you don't have enough oxygen, there's basically only three things you can do. You can either need less energy, which means relax, rest, sleep, all the rest of it, which is not people's preferred option, especially in this day and age. The second thing you can do is put yourself into a fight or flight stress state, which is an option that a lot of people take a lot of the time. And this is very depleting and debilitating over time, whether it's an ancient Eastern system or modern medicine and science. Everyone agrees that chronically high stress chemicals are severely detrimental to the body. But the third thing that you can do is just eat more, right? So this goes back to this. So often the root reason why people eat more, a lot of people talk about a lot of stuff which may all be relevant, like psychology and childhood issues and all the rest of it. But on a very simple, practical level, if your body does not have enough energy because it doesn't have enough oxygen, then it needs more food, glucose, to make up that loss. And oxygen is a hell of a lot more efficient form of energy than food. So, you can never eat enough food to make up for an even moderate lack of oxygen. So this is a root cause, very important to understand. Check out the video to understand more about that. Next, lack of movement. So we've already talked about this, how crucial movement is, how most of our ancient ancestors and even, hey, like our grandparents, our great-grandparents, probably had a role in life where they were standing up and walking and moving and lifting and carrying and all the rest of it throughout a lot of the day. That is not a situation that we're in anymore. This has all kinds of issues, but in terms of what we're talking about here, in terms of what I just mentioned, when we move less, then ultimately less oxygen ends up in our cells. To understand the exact mechanism of that, again, check out the video underneath. But also, movement also helps to move the whole digestive system through. So, in fact, so does breathing correctly, which is the key element of oxygen deficiency. So when we breathe correctly from the belly, what we're doing is we're constantly, if we breathe from the belly, meaning that when we breathe in, the belly goes out, and when we breathe out, the belly goes in. So we're breathing from our belly rather than our chest. If that's how we're breathing, we're constantly massaging those internal organs with our diaphragm, especially the small intestine, which, as we talked about earlier, is the most likely to be a root cause problem. Well, the other thing is that if we are moving throughout the day, if we are walking, if we are picking stuff up, if we're carrying stuff, if we're reaching for stuff, all that kind of stuff, all that again is movement in this area. And as we move this area literally physically, it helps the digestive process actually move things through, which is another reason why highly active people can get away with eating more often. It's even getting away with eating the wrong foods or at the wrong time. It's not just because they need more calories. In fact, that's not really an issue at all. The reason why it's okay for them to eat more is because they do more to move that stuff through, move that stuff out. You know, constipation is an epidemic in our culture, a silent epidemic, but it's a hell of a lot more common among those who are sedentary than it is among those who are active. Now, not always. Some very active people are very stressed. That can get in the way of proper bowel movements as well, as we'll talk about in a second. But you know, it's one of the main causative factors, so not moving enough. So the next root cause is not fasting or cleansing, or if you do some, maybe not doing it enough. So what does this mean? Fasting means basically not eating, right? Or eating less, or eating food that's less challenging to our system. So for me, like a not quite fast, but an intermediate fast might be just having juice and fruits. And the reason, even though that's not a pure fast, there's still some stuff going through. There's some carbohydrates, some vitamins, some minerals, some water, some fiber, but it's completely devoid of any protein. Well, any significant level of protein is completely devoid of any significant level of fat. And so that gives my liver and my gallbladder a break, right? So that's an example of a kind of fasting. You could even look at it like a keto diet, where people cut out all sugars and all carbohydrates. That's kind of a fast, even though people see it as something they should do permanently. Well, I guess some people see having only fruits and juices as permanent as well, but whatever. You could see that as a kind of fast. But the kind of fast that I'm really talking about that's really going to help that stagnation is not eating anything at all, right? Just drinking water, maybe just drinking juices and other stuff, which I'll talk about. So not fasting and not cleansing. Now, again, this can be one of the things, oh, it's not natural. Yes, it is. It's just what's not natural is doing it on purpose, right? Throughout most of our history, again, you know, talking about my own grandmother from Holland, you know, during the Second World War, she was you know, living in the Netherlands and Amsterdam. It was occupied, and there was just no food. Like she was literally starving a lot of the time, right? So that's really bad, obviously. But those periods where we don't eat have some benefit, okay? Some detriment, obviously, but some benefit as well. And so the ideal is to not have it be imposed upon you and develop serious nutritional deficiencies and all the rest of it, which is horrible. But drowning in your own waste on a cellular level is horrible too, right? Starving on a cellular level or drowning in your own waste on a cellular level. They're both horrible in kind of different ways. So fasting and cleansing, doing the right amount of it, is completely natural. It's exactly what our ancestors would do, sometimes on purpose, but often probably, you know, without meaning to. And when I talk about cleansing, I put that distinction. So what does cleansing mean as opposed to just fasting in the context of the intestines and the liver? It means actually consuming things that encourage more waste to leave the body and specifically leave the digestive tract, right? So with some people that may even be purgatives, like getting them to vomit. That is a thing that some people do. I don't recommend or do that. I'm really talking about cleansing as in moving the stuff out of the body and consuming things and doing things, doing practices, procedures and all the rest of it, which encourage the stagnation, the blockage to leave the body other than just not eating. And a lot of people confuse the two. They think just by fasting they're cleansing. They are to some degree, but doing things to really promote cleansing specifically or detoxing takes things to a whole other level. And if you're beyond a certain level of stagnation, like I certainly was, it's kind of not optional if you want to actually resolve the situation. Next is dehydration. One of the main challenges that happens in the digestive tract, one of the main reasons that stuff gets stuck or blocked is because there simply is not enough fluid to help it continue on its journey and continue through. It's as simple as that. So, you know, your body's, specifically your large intestine, ultimately its job is to absorb the fluid so that the waste comes out in a solid form, right? But throughout most of the process, up until and including a lot of the large intestine, you need that liquid to actually move things through. Most people don't consume enough liquid. There's all kinds of issues on a cellular level, but it has this impact on the whole digestive process as well. So dehydration is a big deal. Again, one of those root challenges, and there's a video linked below this video which will go into explaining more about that and what to do about it. Next, abdominal tension. And so what this is, and you know, I could have added here like tension in the psoas specifically, and tension in the diaphragm, which is in the abdominal area, but all of it. So from a, again, Eastern point of view, when you have emotions that you're holding on to, these are actually stored in the body, and they're often stored in this kind of area specifically. They're not often stored in the toe or whatever. They're stored in the abdominal and diaphragmatic region. Now, how you can feel that on a literal level is, have you ever felt yourself like getting so angry that you start to tense up or tight up, or getting so scared maybe that you feel tight and tense in this kind of area? You may not have noticed it because most people are very unaware of what's going on in the body, including me throughout most of my life, not making any judgments. But this is something to tune into. Next time you feel upset, one form of upset or another, tune into what's actually going on in this area. Our human capacity for lack of self-awareness and delusion is endless. So one of the ways to really be able to test whether you have tension in this kind of area or not is just to kind of have a little poke around in there. And if you can kind of, I'm doing it with a pen right now, if you can kind of poke around in there and nothing is really uncomfortable anyway, then, around this area as well, the liver, the stomach, fair enough, good, but for most people, they'll actually find a lot of areas that are very painful in there, and that is a sign of that tension, because you should, as I'm demonstrating right now, be able to, give it a fairly good harsh poke in all this area that should feel totally fine, because if you don't have the muscular tension, then you don't have any issues. So that's something we'll talk about more in the resolution section about recommendations for that, but to understand that, definitely make sure you check out the video below, which talks about abdominal tension as well. Next, nutritional deficiency. So there are a lot of things in this category which can be described as a vicious circle, but this is definitely one of the most obvious ones. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that you need a certain amount of certain nutrients, and I'll pick magnesium as an example because it's kind of obvious. So you need enough magnesium in order to perform peristalsis. So peristalsis is kind of like a snake's undulations, kind of a movement like that where your body is massaging and squeezing and pushing the food through. I mentioned that a little bit earlier when I talked about the stomach, but the reality is the whole digestive tract, including the small and large intestine, if it's working properly, if it's got food in there, it's going to be constantly kind of massaging and moving that food through. Now, it requires a certain amount of, all kinds of nutrients for that, but one of the most important ones is magnesium, because most people are deficient in it. And so when you don't have enough magnesium to perform that contraction and relaxation process, contraction is actually calcium, relaxation is magnesium, but magnesium tends to be the thing that most people are deficient in. Anyway, when you don't have enough to create that process, that's where food can just sit there, right? And then you're even more dependent on moving. Like, if you move a ton, then that helps, but really there's no replacement for healthy peristalsis. A lot of things that work as laxative, that kind of force the things through, are actually work by irritating the system into peristalsis. So let's say that your system is sluggish enough that peristalsis is not easy for it, but it does it, but not very well. But then if you irritate it and make it feel like you've got a poison in there, then it's going to put all of its effort into performing peristalsis to get stuff out. And also, if you take a poison, what that does is release bile from the liver. And when I say poison, I don't mean like arsenic necessarily. What I'm saying is like any laxative, anything that is effective as a laxative tends to be a poison to some degree. Remember, Paracelsus, the difference between medicine and poison is usually dosage, right? So when I'm saying poison, but I mean something that is irritating to the system. So then your liver releases that bile via the gallbladder, and the bile really stimulates peristalsis. This is one of the other challenges if people have weak liver that underproduces bile. They also have challenge with having sufficient peristalsis. So anyway, back to nutritional deficiency. A lack of certain nutrients is key to that. Now, I talked about vicious circle. The reason I talked about that is because if you have a nutritional deficiency, let's say of magnesium, then your peristalsis isn't working as well, and you are not as able to move food through and out, and therefore be able to absorb the nutrients that you need. But if you are not doing that process well enough, then you're more likely to have a deficiency of magnesium and various other nutrients as well, right? So this is like a vicious circle. The less you have the nutrient, the more you can absorb the nutrient. The less you have the nutrient, the less you can absorb the nutrient you need in order to resolve the problem. So this is where it's often a downward spiral with a lot of these issues. I'll talk about that more at the end of this, the complete downward spiral, how one thing can knock everything out of balance. Next is pathogenic organisms. And so this is where I'm going to start getting into territory which is really far out for some people. And I was considering leaving it out, but I would, I never hold anything back from you guys, no matter how controversial it is, because if it's the truth, because I'm giving you everything you need. That's my guarantee with all of these videos, right? So pathogenic organisms. So here's the thing. When food does start to not move through like it should do, as we've been describing, and starts to get blocked and starts to build up, it starts to rot, right? If you were to leave food anywhere, it would start to rot, right? Let alone inside your system, especially if you're not producing enough of stomach acid, which also helps to disinfect the food before it moves onwards in the digestive system. You're very likely, but we all have pathogenic organisms inside us, inside everywhere, and especially inside the digestive tract already. The thing is, they're usually kept at manageable levels. Some people even look at them as allies. Like if you've got like waste building up in you, then these organisms that were usually at manageable levels that your body had no issue with, start to proliferate as they start breaking down this food. And that is, when I say rotting, that is what rotting is. It's organisms breaking something down, right? But generally more pathogenic organisms, whereas probiotic, more beneficial bacteria will tend to, the beneficial bacteria and the beneficial organisms will tend to feed on the healthy, good quality, non-old, non-blocked food, and the bad organisms will tend to feed on the stuff that's old and help it break it down when it's rotting. So now that's the stuff that's already in you. Of course, you can take in pathogenic organisms without meaning to, without realizing it. They're everywhere. They're in certain foods, they're in certain liquids, right? If you might drink water that's not great, whatever, right? There's all these different places that pathogenic organisms can potentially come from. And if the immune system's good enough, then your body can handle it. That's a general wisdom and idea about it. But what people who say that don't really recognize or maybe understand is that if you have this situation where you have this stagnation and blockage, and it could be anywhere, but usually especially in the small intestine, that means that then there is an environment, and also if that small intestine becomes more acidic, because remember, you may not have enough pancreatic juice to keep it from not being too acidic, then you have an environment where pathogenic organisms start to really thrive. So this was a big breakthrough in my life and also my wife's life. I asked her and she gave me permission to talk about this. Several years ago, we started going to see a colonic hydrotherapist practitioner over in Hollywood, of all places, in Los Angeles. And eventually we were so blown away by how effective this was. We both trained in it as well. Now, you know, I don't practice, she only practices in one place. I'm not saying this to try and pitch her on it or anything, but I'm just saying that in that process, we learned how crucial it is to get those organisms out of your body and how much they undermine not just the quality of your health, but actually the quality of your life, the quality of your consciousness when you have especially an excess of these pathogenic organisms inside you. So obviously most of the organisms, most bacteria and all the rest of it are invisible. You can't even see them, but there are some things that you can actually see. And I'll superimpose some slides here for you to see what I'm talking about, the kind of organisms that actually exist inside people. And a lot of these were from my wife, but not exclusively. And you can see this stuff that you're watching now, and you can see this stuff is really bad. Now, this, just so you understand, the size of that tube is roughly the size of the small intestine itself. The vast majority of this comes from the small intestine. One of the objections that you commonly hear to colonics and you know, colon cleansers and all the rest of it is that often when people do a colonoscopy, they take some kind of laxative, and then the doctor, you know, the next day or a couple of days later will shove a camera up there and go, you know, a good distance in the colon, and there's nothing really there. So then medical doctors, scientists are like, well, what are you talking about? There's not all this decades-old waste and stagnation and blockage like I'm now saying. They say, well, that's not true. It's not in there. You can just clear it out, you know, in a day. It's nonsense. But what I say is, okay, but you know, you're not going into the small intestine. It's the small intestine where that stuff actually is. So all this kind of stuff that you're seeing now is from the small intestine. Now, is all of this organisms, or are some of them actually other things, right? Some people would describe it as toxicity. In the Vedic system, they often refer to this as just ama, which is generally translated as toxicity. Some people would say it's plaque. Some people would say it's mucus. To me, like I used to brew kombucha a lot, and also kefir. I still do kefir. And to me, it looks a lot like that. And just if you don't know, kombucha is basically a drink that is made by fermenting sugary tea, and you add what's called a SCOBY to it. And it looks basically like, you know, what you saw. It looks like a kind of jellyfish kind of creature that just forms in whatever shape you give it, right? So if you give it a container this big, it will create it forms on the surface, it will create kind of jellyfish type thing this big. If you put it in a container this big, it will create one this big. It just fills whatever space it's in. And that's what seems to happen in the small intestine as well. These things that are coming out seem like they have formed inside the small intestine and formed that shape. So is it definitely a pathogenic organism? I don't know for certain. I mean, I feel like I do know, but I can't prove it to you. But what I can say is whatever it is, even if you don't believe that this thing is alive and real, even if you don't think it's like a kombucha SCOBY. And by the way, kombucha SCOBY is like positive organism, but these are negative. How do we know that they're negative? Because of the unpleasantness that you can, not necessarily, but you can feel as they're leaving the body, and the massive relief and benefit that you get once they have left the body. And this is going to sound really out there, but it's been absolutely proven. There's a great book called Parasite Rex that different pathogenic organisms are able to actually affect their host. You know, they can make, certainly this has been studied extensively in the animal kingdom. For some reason, not in the human kingdom, maybe it grosses people out, but parasites in the animal kingdom can affect their host into making fundamentally different decisions. They can affect them into getting involved in mating with, you know, making different mating decisions they would normally do, make different traveling decisions they normally do. They can even cause the host to like kill themselves. The common kind of mainstream-ish version of that people are aware of is this idea that candida, this is one of the things that can live in the small intestine, and that if you have sugar cravings, it's not you, it's actually the candida. So this is accurate from my point of view. It's not necessarily candida, it's some kind of sugar feeding an organism. It could be some kind of yeast, some kind of mold, some kind of whatever, but it's some kind of organism. And so in the case of the kind of organisms that you especially saw there, they seem to create a lot of anxiety in the person having them. So when my wife first went in to have that procedure, before she even had her first one, the practitioner who ended up being our teacher said he already knew that she was a highly anxious person, which she was, right? And because of that, now obviously that's just, you know, his observational skills that anyone could have, but because of that, he already knew that she would be filled with this particular type of parasite, which she was. And the amount of impact it had, yes, on her digestion, yes, on her health, yes, on, you know, the way that she looked, the way that she felt, but even on the impact that it had on her level of anxiety. Her level of anxiety went way down as she started to get more and more of this, let's say, stuff out of her, although I'm, again, pretty firmly convinced that it's some kind of life form of some kind, right? Some kind of organism. Some kind of, again, SCOBY, the kombucha thing stands for a symbiotic combination of bacteria and yeast. This may be a combination of bacteria and yeast, maybe other stuff. Whatever it is, getting it out of her was a profound thing for her. It's actually a profound thing for me, but it's especially profound for her. What is it specifically? Again, most pathogenic organisms you can't see with the naked eye, right? You need some kind of microscope. But what is this kind of jellyfish-looking thing? I've heard it described as intestinal rope parasite. And the person, my teacher in this, taught me that, and this is from his perspective, which funnily enough, going full circle, relates very much to the Taoist and Ayurvedic perspective. His perspective is this stuff keeps growing inside the small intestine, really no matter what. But the more you do all these things wrong that we talked about, the more quickly it grows and the more quickly it proliferates. And the real challenge is that as it grows and proliferates, it starts to get, first of all, it starts to block the small intestine, which relates to all these problems. That's what we're talking about here. But also little particles of it, because it's like fractal. You only have to take one little piece, just like with kombucha scobing. You only have to take one little piece, put it in a new culture, and it'll form, you know, again, however big it wants to, or however big the space is available to it. It's the same with this. So little pieces of it start to get absorbed through the villi into the liver, and then from the liver they're actually spread throughout the body. So from his perspective, it is the cause of all disease. All disease is really just this stuff being transported throughout the body, especially when it gets out of control in the small intestine and the large intestine. And then, you know, if it proliferates in one area, it's called one thing. If it proliferates in another area, it's called another thing. I'm not sure about that. Things are rarely as simple as like one cause is the problem of anything, but I would say it's definitely a significant factor, and this is something I expect you to believe, but it's something that if you really want to be better, then to get this stuff out of you in with the systems I'm going to recommend, it's amazing how different you feel. It's a whole different world. It's a whole different universe. And then I saved probably the most important or root causes for last, and I'll do these two together. So an unhealthy microbiome, and then depleted calming neurotransmitters. And so these two are very much connected, but let me explain what they are first. So the word microbiome is used a lot these days. What a microbiome basically is an accumulation of all kinds of different organisms. So when I say an unhealthy microbiome, what that means is that the total sum of all the different microorganisms in our body tends to skew more towards unhealthy. So like in an ideal situation, we would have 80 or 90% healthy microorganisms, and then, or at least healthy or like neutral, indifferent microorganisms, and then we'd have 20% or ideally much less of the pathogenic microorganisms. Unfortunately, a lot of the time in our modern society, and there could be a lot of different reasons for this, you know, a lot of which we've already talked about, but unfortunately a lot of the time it's actually the other way around. We have predominantly bad microorganisms, and so everything we do is just to kind of suppress those and keep those at bay to some degree, whether it's taking antibiotics, consuming like onions and garlic on a everyday basis, or drinking alcohol, smoking tobacco. All of these things reduces pathogenic organisms, but of course it has all kinds of other negative consequences as well. Now, the only thing that I said there that may have thrown you is the onion and garlic thing. I thought those were supposed to be good for me, Owen. Well, it depends. So what onions and garlic do is they actually damage our good, healthy bacteria. And so that's the main thing that constitutes a healthy microbiome, by the way, is bacteria. Some people also say there are beneficial yeasts and fungi living inside us. Some people are not so sure. But what we know for an absolute fact is that when we have an abundance of healthy bacteria in our whole digestive tract specifically, but really covering our entire body, that's when we have all kinds of health benefits coming from that. There are ones that are understood by mainstream science. So for instance, we understand that a lot of our amino acids, there's only 8 essential amino acids. Amino acids are building blocks of protein because most of them can be made by our body, often with the assistance of different healthy bacteria inside us. Vitamin B12 is something that comes from healthy bacteria. So if we have a healthy microbiome, specifically if we have a lot of healthy bacteria inside us, then we tend to be able to get away with a lot more because we have the capacity to create the healthy things, the essential nutrients that we need to a greater degree. And we also tend to be able to deal with the bad stuff that we take in to a greater degree. So why is alcohol not great? And also why are onions and garlic not great? Because they kill bacteria, right? Including the healthy bacteria, the quote-unquote good bacteria, the bacteria that are actually trying to help us. So just so we understand this, the bacteria that we have inside us specifically are absolutely crucial for our health. We have to understand that we have a lot more bacterial cells in our body than we have human cells. There are some far out theories that actually say that the basis of consciousness in the human body is not really the brain or whatever. In fact, the basis of consciousness is not something understood by Western science at all. So for them, it's just a big I don't know. But there are theories that that's actually rooted in the biological intelligence inside us, not the human cells at all, which is kind of far out theory. One of the things that I do know to be the case is that when we do not have enough healthy bacteria inside us, and by the way, almost no one does. And what am I basing that on? Because back in the Paleolithic era, back when we were still hunter-gatherers, we had a completely different digestive system to a significant degree. And one of the things that was different about it is that what is now the appendix, which is a much larger organ called the cecum, and it used to create all kinds of peptides which would send signals to our cells telling them to create more of the neurochemicals which make us feel good and the neurochemicals which make us calm, specifically oxytocin, serotonin, GABA, and you can find out more about that in the video which there'll be a link to underneath this where we go into a lot more detail about this, but suffice it to say for now, no substance can make you feel good directly. The only thing that a substance can do is make you feel good by stimulating the release into the bloodstream of feel-good neurochemicals that you already have inside you. In fact, a lot of the neurochemicals were discovered by looking at drugs and what drugs did and looking at the action that they would have in the body. So for instance, the endocannabinoids are a recent class and they were only discovered because, as the name suggests, cannabis, right? The opioids, for instance, like morphine, heroin, all the rest of it, are how we found out about our own endorphin system. But the truth is that no drug makes you feel a certain way except for through its action on your own neurochemicals. So if you don't have enough of those neurochemicals to feel calm, if you don't have enough of those neurochemicals to feel healthy, if you don't have enough of those neurochemicals to feel happy, if you don't have enough of them to feel confident, if you don't have enough of them to feel peaceful and centered, then that's where we get very tempted to take all kinds of drugs to kind of make up for that neurochemical deficiency. But that's also where we're very tempted to do all the stuff up here, which is why I said that we're really now discussing the more root issues, right? So for instance, if you are depleted in serotonin, which most people are, and SSRI drugs, which are drugs that kind of block your body from being able to reuptake the serotonin that you have in circulation, which can work and can be disastrous. You know, it's not natural, obviously, to artificially stop your body being able to reabsorb a neurochemical. What will be much better is to be actually telling your body to make more of the neurochemical so you get it up to an optimal level. And that's something that's possible when you have a healthy microbiome and when you have a healthy body in general. And again, you can find out a lot more about that. Click the link below, and there's a extensive training that will show you all about what it takes to regain your calming neurotransmitters. But in the context of a stagnant intestines and stagnant liver, what you need to understand is a lot of this stuff, eating too much, right? Eating the wrong foods. Why are we eating sugary foods? Why are we drinking alcohol? Probably because we are deficient in serotonin, or at least that's going to be a significant factor, right? Because, you know, why do you eat sweet foods? Because it makes you feel happy, right? Well, what kind of happy does it make you feel? Probably makes you feel a bit more calm, a bit more relaxed, a bit more happy, right? So that's the serotonin kind of feeling. Why do people overeat fatty foods, especially creamy foods? Well, that stimulates oxytocin, which is another feel-good neurochemical, right? So it's really important to understand that because you have these depleted neurotransmitters, that's why you have addictions to things. You know, I've known people who've been in the natural health world, whatever you want to call it, for, you know, like decades. They're teachers, they're speakers, they're authors, they're this or that, and they still can't stop themselves from like binging and gorging on food that's bad for them. And I'm not, you know, judging anyone, trying to make anything wrong. I'm saying that's because all the knowledge in the world is great, and even all the willpower, like I'm, you know, generally considered to be quite a high willpower person by people who know me, but my willpower runs out. Everyone's does eventually, right? Some people it runs out quickly, some people it takes a long time, and you know, it's only when you're finally stressed and exhausted and pushed beyond your limit that you finally crack. But you know, willpower only lasts so long. But what lasts forever is having good levels of neurotransmitters so you don't have any desire for any of these things that are bad for you. So this is really something that is a root cause issue, which I hope you can see, which needs to be addressed. I've explained briefly the connections to the microbiome, though you really got to check out the video underneath for you know, more understanding about that. Now, I didn't put antibiotics on this list, and that is on purpose because you know, they are basically just one of the things that creates an unhealthy microbiome. How do they do that? Well, antibiotics, like I mentioned about alcohol, for instance, they kill all bacteria. And so, as I say, there are good bacteria, bad bacteria, indifferent bacteria. But generally what tends to happen is when you wipe out all the good bacteria, then the other pathogenic organisms get a chance to grow because there aren't the healthy bacteria to keep them in line. So we're talking about fungal infections, yeast infections, candida, those kind of things, right? And then once those have proliferated and got a grip, like are in a dominant position, it's very difficult for the healthy microbiome, the healthy bacteria to get back into a dominant position. You can take all the probiotics you want, you know, you can stop taking antibiotics, you can eat well, you can do all that stuff, and that stuff will help, but it still doesn't really resolve the issue, which is where you've got to actually clear a lot of that stagnation, right? What in the East they refer to as stagnation and blocked qi and stuff like that. Certainly when it comes to the digestive system, part of it is the byproduct of those pathogenic organisms like mucus and plaque and all the rest of it. But part of it is you just got to clear out those bad organisms. There's no other way around it. You've got to do that in order to be healthy. So anyway, that leads us nicely into our for a permanent solution part of the training. So recap, we're not doing the thing that we usually do in my trainings where we talk about the quick fix, then the permanent solutions. The quick fix for stagnant intestines and liver is really covered in my how to resolve constipation video, which you can check out below because that's just giving you like a quick clear out. With this, we're talking about going beyond the quick clear out and actually resolving this issue once and for all, which, as we've talked about, if not the biggest cause of ill health and disease and unhappiness and stress, is at least one of the most important major factors. So the first thing that you've got to learn to do that's super important, and probably not something you're expecting me to say, is you've got to learn to eat what's satisfying. Now, this is kind of like a new paradigm, right? Generally, we're kind of torn between two different things if we're in the natural health world. We're torn between the things that I want to eat, that I enjoy, which often may be things that are bad for you, right? The sugary foods, the foods with chemicals in, whatever it may be for you. And then the things that we should eat because they're healthy, right? And here's the thing I've got to say to you. If the food that you're eating is not satisfying to you, then not only will you not be able to stick with it, because the whole willpower thing that we just talked about, but more importantly, it's probably not even giving you what you need, right? But here's the thing to think about. Does junk food satisfy you? Does a cake satisfy you? Does a bad quality pizza or whatever satisfy you? The answer is no. And one of the ways you can tell it's not satisfying is because people, when they have it, they tend to eat more and more and more of it, right? They binge it. The reason that you binge things that are often empty calories is because they don't really contain what you need. The crazy thing is, though, this is even true for foods that are quote-unquote healthy, right? For me, for a long time, I was like binging foods that are supposed to be perfectly good for you, like nuts and seeds, for instance, because I was craving something, I was missing something, and it was the only way that I could kind of make myself feel full, right? But it wasn't a good type of fullness. I would just feel like, I've overdone it, I've gorged myself on it. So even though I was, for many years now, before I discovered the secrets that I want to share with you, what I did is I would way overeat the things that were supposedly good, but not satisfying to me. And then it turned out actually that they weren't really good at all, at least not for me, not for my body type. Now, of course, because of the particular body type that I am, that pattern didn't lead to gaining a lot of weight for me. But for a lot of body types, when they're doing that, when they're eating foods, whether you're eating foods just because you like the taste, because they're, giving you a boost of your calming neurotransmitters, as explained earlier, or even because, they're what you should be eating, but if they're not satisfying to you, then they're actually not helping you. You're going to tend to overeat them. They're going to tend to be unbalancing for you in some way. And if you don't overeat them, then at some point you're going to swing the other way and eat like something really unhealthy because you don't feel satisfied. So it's really important to find out what's satisfying for you. Now, that in itself is a huge subject, and you've got to check out the video. Again, you can find a link underneath to find out the best foods for you, depending on your body type. This is a unique system. This is not the blood type system. This is not the metabolic typing system. This is not the everyone's the same, like everyone should be vegan, everyone should be keto. No, this is not that at all. This is something fundamentally different you've almost certainly never heard of, 99% chance you've never heard of it, but that I found is the only thing that actually explains so much about why people are the way they are, why some people are different from other people, and most importantly, in context of what we're talking about here, for you to work out what combination of foods are going to genuinely satisfy you. Now, the next piece of advice I've got to give you is never sleep full. Now, I'm not saying go to bed hungry, right? Is there time where that could be appropriate? Maybe so, right? We human beings are not designed to always eat all the time. Again, some body types do better fasting and not eating than others. Some really struggle with it. But whatever you do, what I'm talking about is don't get into the cycle of, and this is the most common thing that I see in people who have stagnation. I used to do it myself for a long time. I would be stressed all day, so I wouldn't eat that much. And then at the end of the day, I would like gorge myself and binge and eat vast amounts of food. Partly because it's the first time I felt truly like hungry, because it's the first time that I kind of relaxed. And second of all, because I wasn't that relaxed and I needed all that food to just kind of calm me down and ground me and bring me down to earth after running around all day. Now that may not exactly be you, but for some people it's they skip breakfast for other reasons, or they don't eat much during the day for other reasons. Maybe they're trying to diet, or they're trying to be healthy and they end up making up for it at the end of the day. But whatever it may be for you, that tendency, that pattern of mainly eating at the end of the day is one of the biggest things that's going to create stagnation in your intestines, because you're not meant to be digesting food when you're sleeping. Now, again, you don't have to be completely empty, right? But having a very large meal, having a heavy meal, and then going to sleep not long after, if you're some body types, if you're a body type similar to mine, then that's just going to disturb your sleep. You're going to find it very difficult to get to sleep at all in the first place, which is going to keep you up later. You may wake up a few hours later. When you wake up the next morning, if you do manage to sleep, then your whole belly's going to feel like a rock. It's really bad. Now, for other types, they don't have that issue at all. But what happens for them is that they have no discomfort, no issue, totally fine. But then they gain weight, right? There's very few types who this is actually good for. And I'd say the only type maybe is the person who is working, doing hard physical labor, 6 to 8+ hours a day. Someone who's at the gym training 4 hours a day, an athlete. Maybe in that case you could go to sleep full because your metabolism's burning so quickly, your digestive system is so optimized that maybe then it's okay. But for the vast majority of us, this is not going to work, okay? So do not go to sleep full. Doesn't mean you have to go to sleep hungry, but wait a few hours after eating, at least until you don't feel full anymore, whatever that is for you, right? For me, that means waiting several hours. For you, maybe that only means waiting an hour or two, but whatever it takes, don't go to sleep full. Okay, next. The next thing you've really got to commit to doing if you're really serious about getting your intestines and your liver healthy long term is to commit to learning to breathe correctly. Now, I don't have to talk to you all about the benefits of that because I already talked about it earlier when I talked about oxygen deficiency. But getting into learning how to breathe in a way that your cells get enough oxygen is absolutely crucial. So go ahead and click the link underneath to learn all about that. This is one of the best things you ever learn. It's one of my top 3 best things that I've ever learned for my health, my energy, my happiness, my productivity, my success in life, even my relationships, because when you learn to do this, you feel a lot less stress, you're a lot less kind of emotional, you're able to be more centered and yet also present and engaged with people. Like every aspect of your life is going to benefit from learning how to do this. So I can't recommend it strongly enough. I wish I could show you now in 2 minutes, but it's a thing. You need to learn how to do it. It's a skill. The great thing is, it doesn't cost any money. You don't have to pay anyone. And once you learn how to do it, it's something that you're set for life. So definitely recommend that. Next thing that's super important to resolve stagnant intestines and liver on a permanent basis is to move throughout the day. Now, when I say move throughout the day, like everyone's going to have a different version of this, but here's the thing. Some people, I can't do that, Owen. I've got a desk job, I can't do that. I've got an injury. Okay. I'm not saying like you have to reach some level of perfection, but what I'm saying is do your best. So I'll take me, for example, right now. I do a job that, involves a lot of being in front of a computer, frankly. So, but what do I choose to do? Well, I'm filming these videos. I could have chosen to do them sitting down. I choose to do them standing up, really mainly because it's better for my body. That's the main reason I do it. I hope that the presentation style suits you. I know some people prefer it if I were more, like calm and seated and sedentary or whatever. Like I kind of like being enthusiastic about things and gesticulating and stuff like that. But I also just do it as a habit because it's good to move your body, right? Now, as well as being in front of a computer a lot, I'm on the phone a lot. I'm working with a lot of different people. And, whenever I'm on the phone, am I sitting down? No, I'm standing up, right? I'm standing up, I'm moving around. Again, I'm gesticulating. So do you see what I mean? If you're going down to the store and it's like a 5-minute drive or a 15-minute walk, walk, right? Like all these different things. Now, on top of that, of course, to do exercise, to do resistance training, do cardio training, do whatever. But that's great. But if you're like in a box 16 hours a day and then you're moving like 45 minutes in the gym, I don't believe that's actually, certainly in terms of what we're talking about here, that's not better than just, getting up and moving throughout the day whenever you have the opportunity. Whereas most people do the opposite, right? They try and avoid standing up, they try to avoid walking, they try to avoid picking stuff up and moving around wherever possible. Now, of course, if you're thinking, well, Owen, I'd love to, but I just don't have the energy for that, then I refer you to my previous recommendation, right? If you learn how to breathe correctly, you have enough oxygen going into the mitochondria of your cells to produce enough ATP, then you'll have enough energy to move around. And then you just need to be in the habit of doing it. You need to be thinking, what opportunities do I have today to move rather than to sit down, right? Because sitting all day is really bad for you. They're calling it the new smoking, right? We talked about this already, but look for opportunities to move whenever you can. Next one, hydrate. So the simple advice is just drink more liquids, right? But make sure that you drink liquids that don't dehydrate you. It's not as simple as drink more liquids, okay? Because some things dehydrate you. Coffee dehydrates you, soda, like the fizzy drinks, the sugary drinks certainly dehydrate you. Tea dehydrates you. But did you know even things that are like supposed to be considered to be very healthy, like celery juice, also dehydrates you, or nettle juice, for instance, or nettle tea, dandelion tea, these kind of things. Now, I'm not saying not to have the latter, right, the herbal stuff and the vegetables, but what I am saying is just don't count that as something that's hydrating, right? So hydration means really water, and also vegetable juices to some degree, some fruit juices to some degree, but it mainly means water, right? Now, what kind of water? How much should you have? When should you have it? All that kind of thing. That's a whole conversation itself. It deserves its own, admittedly short on this, but still its own video. So check out a link for the video underneath where I talk about the whole issue of hydration and what you should do for that. But definitely hydrate. Drink more, think about it, and make sure whatever you do to always have something hydrating with you at all times. I never go out without a bottle of water with me. I always have a bottle of water. I always have a glass of water by my side. So have it there. That's the first thing. And then second of all, use it. Now, at this point, you're like, oh, I know, and I've heard this before. I know it's supposed to be good for me to drink water. I just hate doing it. Then don't worry. I'm not making you wrong. What's probably going on in that case is that you're depleted in electrolytes, and you need to increase your electrolytes first, and then to the degree that you actually then want to have the hydration, right? So if, now you can overdo it as well, and it depends on a lot of different factors. Depends on your activity level, depends on your size, depends on how warm it is, depends on how dry it is. There's all kinds of factors to consider, but if you're not drinking any water and the only thing you consume all day is coffee and soda, for instance, you can be sure that you're dehydrated. Why is this important in terms of the intestines? We've talked about it before, right? When the intestines start to become more dried out, when they become less lubricated, stagnation is inevitable. So this is something you've got to be on top of for a long-term solution. Next, if you're not already doing this, you've got to start eating on a regular basis more high water content and high fiber foods. Not just any foods though. This is where the body type thing is really important to understand. For instance, when I first learned about this and I was kind of fumbling around in the dark over a decade ago trying to work this out for myself, this intense stagnation that was going on in my intestines, I thought, oh, more fiber, and I started to have like wheat fiber products, cereals and stuff like that. Now for my body type, that's really bad. It's, it's irritating, it doesn't work, it's actually constipating, it's like the worst thing you can do. But for other body types, that could be a really smart idea, right? So, for me, more high water content, soluble foods, and soluble fiber foods were a lot better, like for instance, having cucumbers. But for some body types, that's not great. It's too cooling for their digestive system. So it really depends on the person. It really depends on the person as to what type of high water content and high fiber food you have. But you've got to have some, whatever type you are, there are some foods that are that, and you need to focus on them and have more of them. If you're my kind of type, then it's going to be more greens. If you're the opposite type of me, then it's going to be more root vegetables, right? You might have more carrots, more sweet potatoes and stuff like that, and beets, beetroot, and then you would juice those, for instance. So that would be your way of doing it. So it depends as to what type you are as to exactly which type you're going to go for, but you need to eat those. You need to, whatever type you are, there is no type that benefits from having only very dry and drying foods, okay? So more high water content, high fiber foods. Next thing, you've got to fast periodically. Now, when I say periodically, I've left that purposefully vague because it does depend, right? If you are someone who is constantly working, has constant demands and all the rest of it, your fast might be very different to someone who can afford to take a few days or even a couple of weeks off and go to some, luxury retreat center in some fancy place, right? Or anything in between. I'm not, I don't want to say everyone has to do exactly the same thing because of those practicalities that I just mentioned, but also, again, because of body types, right? Some body types, like my body type, does a lot better fasting. I've been fasting a lot recently, which is why I look even thinner than usual. Don't worry, it'll get built back up. But, it's not, but here's the thing. Whatever body type you are, it's not natural to never be hungry, okay? So now there are all kinds of reasons why you might not fast, right? You may have hypoglycemia or even more severe diabetes, in which case it's actually dangerous for you to do so. Okay, so let's tackle that. When I say fasting, let me clarify what I actually mean. So fasting could be as simple as, depending on where you're at, it might just be no alcohol, no fried foods, no butter for a few days. And I know some people, oh, butter's really great for you. Well, and again, depends on the body type, can be. But that's just, picking something random out of thin air. Whatever it is for you, you're going to know what foods are bad for you. Maybe it's going to be, some body types would actually fast from sugar, right? So doing like a keto diet, for like a week, in a way, is like fasting from carbohydrates, right? Whereas, there are some body types that's really not going to work for. So for them, maybe more like my type, a fast might be not having any high-fat foods, right? So I might just have, fruits and vegetables for a few days or something like that. So that's kind of like the first level of fasting. The first level of fasting is just cutting out stuff that's really bad. So, like this would have been a better example. No processed foods, no fast food, no foods where there's things in the ingredients that I don't know what it is, right? Just no toxic stuff. And then the next level from that might be, what I suggested, like no carbs or no fats, something like that. Not that that's healthy forever, but for a limited period of time, right? We're talking about fasting. And depending on which organs you have strong and weak, that's what so for me, I tend to have a weaker gallbladder and liver, so I would have a break from fat because that would stress me. For other people, they might have a weak pancreas, which gets stressed by too much sugar, and so they might take a break from sugar. Other people, might have weak kidneys, and so they may take a break from animal proteins for a few days, whatever it may be for you, right? And, there's a lot more detail about this in my program. We go into it in detail. But anyway, that's like, just really basics. So next level of fasting would be to only have blended food, right? So you might be having smoothies, you might be having blended soups, right? So technically there is no food that you can't eat if you're on a blended diet. You just have to have it blended, right? And this takes some of the strain off the digestive system. It takes stress off the stomach specifically of having to, break things down and mash things up. But really the whole digestive system has to work because, most of us don't chew great, let's face it, right? Even if you do chew very well, there are some foods that are very difficult to break down that, your body's got to go to effort to do so. So when you blend it all up, it makes it easier for your body. The next level is just having juices, right? So now we're getting kind of serious. This is where you might probably only going to have like some combinations of fruits and vegetables, and you're going to juice them, which means removing the fiber. That puts less pressure on the digestive system still, right? Because it doesn't even have any fiber to move through, and you just get the nutrients coming straight in. All body types can do this to some degree, right? Even if you're the opposite body type of me, who tends to do better on more of a high-fat diet and low carb and all the rest of it, you could still generally fast a little bit of juices of just root vegetables, carrot and beet, something like that. So that with fennel maybe. So that would work for you temporarily. So that's something that you could do. And then the most extreme level of fast is where you're just having water. Often when I do that, I have water with salt or water with sodium bicarb or something like that. So still getting the kind of very basics that you need. Some people just have broth, some people just have hot tea, right? But basically very little calories. That's the key point of that. And then of course the most pure of all is when you just have water. So those are kind of the different levels of fast. And how long do you do that for? Well, you know, the probably simplest form of fasting is very popular these days called intermittent fasting, right? I refer to intermittent fasting as just, you know, eating 2 meals a day. I eat a meal an hour or two after I get up, I eat another meal 6 hours later, something like that, and then I don't eat again until the next day. So, you know, to me that's simple. To some people, again, with different body types, or maybe who are doing a lot more strenuous physical work than me, that, you know, is more of a challenge. But whatever, just having that 16 hours a day where you're not eating, and you know, the type of intermittent fasting they often recommend where you skip breakfast and eat like a, you know, at the end of the day is a bad idea for reasons I've just talked about earlier. So I wouldn't recommend that. I personally recommend that have it at the beginning and middle of the day, or at least not right at the end of the day. If you can't do it that way, you don't want to do it that way. But intermittent fasting is a really good kind of dipping your toe in the water of fasting. And then of course there's a combination of what I just said, right? So you could do fasting in the sense that you have one solid normal meal a day, you have whatever you want, but then you have a couple of days, then your other couple of meals, if you have say 3 meals a day, are just going to be blended or just going to be juiced, or do you see what I'm saying? So like combinations of different things, but fasting as in giving your digestive system a break so it can start to deal with this backlog, because that's a lot of what a stagnation is. It's a lot of other stuff as well, but partly it's just backlog. And the truth is, like, your body can't deal with all that backlog of trapped rotting waste, the different organisms, the plaque, the mucus, all the rest of it. It can't deal with all that if it's constantly got food to be dealing with. So if you just reduce the food or reduce the difficulty of how difficult the food is to digest, as I said, even by blending it, you give your body a chance to start processing and dealing with that backlog of stagnation. So that's fasting, super important, highly recommend it. I try to put it this way to say, look, you can kind of just dip your toe in the water, you can take baby steps, like whatever you're comfortable with. And of course, when you understand the body types, you're going to be a lot more clear about what's the very best thing to do for you. So the next recommendation for long-term getting rid of that stagnation is doing a series of colonic hydrotherapy. Now notice I said series, not just do one or do one every month or every 6 months or something like that. Doing one colonic hydrotherapy session will tend to clear away, if it's done well, will tend to clear away at best the stagnation in the large intestine. And that matters, it can really help, it can really make you feel better. But that's more like a relief thing, that's not a long-term solution thing. A long-term solution thing is to do a series. So when you do a series of colonic hydrotherapy, especially if it's done well by someone who knows what they're doing, like my lovely wife, when someone really knows what they're doing and they do a series review, and a series means several days in a row, or maybe every other day, but why do we want to do it that way? Because during the first session, all you're really doing, ideally, and sometimes you can't even do this because there's so much of a backlog, but ideally if the practitioner is really good and the situation is not too bad, you're clearing out the backlog that's stuck in the large intestine. But that's not too difficult to do anyway. You could always do that by taking some extreme laxatives like doctors would give you before a colonoscopy, for instance. So that's good, but that's not going to change your life, right? What's going to change your life is getting rid of the stagnation in the small intestine and then the liver, right? Now, when you do a series of colonics, what happens is, so first of all, you're clearing out the large intestine. Second of all, you're starting to hydrate the large intestine, which then helps to hydrate the whole body, but helps to hydrate the whole intestinal system specifically. When the large intestine is clear, if your small intestine is then overloaded with all kinds of parasites, all kinds of waste, mucus, plaque, and all the rest of it, your body goes, oh, I've got space. And it starts dumping that waste from the small intestine into the large intestine. Okay, so then you're not just clearing out like your waste that you'd probably clear out anyway. You're starting to clear away a backlog, right? And so this is hard to imagine if you hadn't seen it. That's why we're including the slides that you will have seen earlier. But when you clear away the large intestine, you do a series of colonics, you start to see all kinds of stuff come out of your body that is definitely not food, right? Sometimes it's hard to say exactly what it is. Is it plaque? Is it some kind of organism? Is it mucus? Is it candida? Different people have different opinions on exactly what it is, and to some degree it's kind of different every time. But the point is, it's really unpleasant, and it feels really unpleasant when it's leaving your body, and then as soon as it's out, it feels fantastic, right? So then that's starting to clear the small intestine, the parasites and whatever else it might be in there. But here's the really interesting thing. When your small intestine starts to be clearer, what happens next? Well, then your liver starts to go, oh, there's space now. And then your liver starts damping its backlog of stagnation via the gallbladder into the duodenum. And then your liver starts to be less blocked and stagnated. And then what does the liver do? The liver filters and processes poisons throughout the whole body. So then if the liver starts to be less overburdened with stagnation, then your body's, oh, hey liver, there's all this backlog of toxicity throughout my body. Let's start processing. So then it starts processing that. So what I'm saying is that when we talk about colonic hydrotherapy, we're not just talking about the colon, which is another name for large intestine. We're actually detoxing the whole body if we do a series like I'm talking about here. Now, the next thing you want to consider doing is taking a parasite cleanser. Now, I'm only putting this in the consider category, whereas with a lot of other things I've kind of insisted on it, because if you really go for it with the colonic hydrotherapy, it may not be necessary. So my understanding is there's basically two ways of getting parasites out of your body. Now, before I get into that, let me just address, like, do you even have parasites? Do we have parasites? Well, we just talked about that, hopefully, right? Most people do, and they don't realize it. It also depends how you define a parasite. If you define it the way that I was talking about earlier, the kind of thing that looks like a SCOBY, it seems that every single person who has colonic hydrotherapy has those inside them. And does taking things that kill parasites clear that out faster and more quickly and more effectively? Yeah, usually is the answer. However, things that kill parasites also tend to be somewhat toxic to the body. Not that much, but if you're sensitive, it can be not ideal. The other problem with killing parasites by taking things, usually herbs, but there's pharmaceutical drugs as well that sometimes can have their place if that's preferable depending on the situation. But whatever you're using to kill parasites, you got to remember, if you take a worm, whether it's a big long tapeworm or a tiny little threadworm or whatever, if you kill that, it doesn't just poof, like magically disappear out of your body. It's then a dead thing that's inside you. And what do dead things, dead animals, dead organisms inside you do? They rot, right? So then your body, your immune system's got to deal with a rotting organism inside it. Now, in many cases, that's preferable to a live one that's wreaking havoc and crapping out toxic waste and feeding on your nutrients and interfering with your digestion and all the rest of it. I'm not saying it's not worth it, but it's not ideal. So the ideal thing is if you really go for it with the colonic hydrotherapy, one of the things that these parasites do to stay in your intestines is to they're just sticky. They just stick to the wall of the intestine. So when you do a series of colonics, one of the reasons it's so effective is because it so hydrates the whole intestinal system. It super hydrates them, and then these organisms just kind of fall off. And so it's much better for an organism to just fall off and be flushed out rather than be killed by some kind of thing that's toxic to it and then die and then rot, and then your immune system's got to deal with the pathogenic bacteria that then start to break down because, so it's a whole other thing. So taking things that kill parasites absolutely can be a good idea. Even if you do the colonic hydrotherapy as well, it can really fast track the process. But a lot of the time it can also create unpleasant side effects, and sometimes, you know, they call that the die-off process. And so if that die-off is too unpleasant for you, then the usually less debilitating way of doing it would be the first way. Next thing you want to do is top up magnesium. So I already talked about this in the How to Resolve Constipation video, which you watched first, like I suggested. But basically understand that yes, magnesium is going to be like an instant thing that helps to clear you out, but also most people are deficient in magnesium, and you need to have enough magnesium in order to have adequate peristalsis for your body, because that's one of the things that's making you stagnant, right? Is that you don't have the peristalsis, you don't have your intestines and your whole digestive tract doing the rhythmic squeezing process of squeezing it through. When you don't have enough magnesium, then that's one of the factors that will stop that happening. So make sure you stay on top of your magnesium. The next thing you might want to consider trying is digestive enzymes. So again, for me, at some points in my life, this has been really helpful. Some points it hasn't. But it may well be, if you're having that stagnation, that you're struggling to digest your food. And so this may well help, right? It may well help to break down some of that stagnation, because what these digestive enzymes do, if they're good and they're strong and they're good quality, and I'll make sure I link to a good quality example in the description underneath. So this can be something that really supports your digestive process while you're getting the stagnation out. Ditto for bile or HCl supplements. Now I kind of abbreviated that a bit. Usually that's ox bile and betaine HCl. And so basically these are things that supplement the digestive juices of the liver, gallbladder and stomach respectively, right? So if you have a lack of bile, then you're going to have more and more stagnation of fat in your intestines, because you're supposed to have enough bile to break down and emulsify the fat to be able to then absorb it. If you don't, and a classic sign of this, if you're going to the toilet and what's coming out is oily and greasy and floats or sticks to the side of the toilet, sorry, but you know, got to be clear here, then that's a sign that you're not producing enough bile, or that there's some blockage, which we'll talk about more when we get to the liver. That means that you're not digesting fats properly, right? And that leads to more stagnation. And with the HCl, that's a supplement for the stomach acid, which specifically breaks down protein, as we talked about in the beginning of the video. So again, if you're lacking in that, then having more will help that and will help to stop protein, specifically animal protein, obviously being the worst. If that gets stuck inside you and starts to stagnate and rot, then that's not good. So both of those supplements can be really helpful. And if you know your body type, then you already know, which organs are strong, which organs are weak, which are likely to need support, which aren't. But of course, even, despite your body type, sometimes there's life circumstances, which means that, you're in a particular situation. So if you already know that your stomach underproduces stomach acid, or you already know that your gallbladder underproduces, or at least underexcretes bile, then supplementing with that can be a really good idea. So we talked about the microbiome earlier. What can you do about it? I definitely recommend, if you want to clear out the stagnation in your intestines and your liver, to regularly consume probiotics. Now, what form? There's basically two types. There's food form and the supplement form. I'm a big fan of both, but especially the food and drink form. I'm not a big fan of kombucha anymore, though I used to be, because these days I like to not have any alcohol, not have any caffeine, which there are still, some of in those drinks. But I will have some coconut kefir. I might have one of the Kavita drinks, which are available in some places. And then in terms of food, having different kinds of fermented food is really great. I tend to, ferment things before I consume them, even like grains, I'll tend to ferment beforehand. I'm a big fan of Ethiopian food, where they ferment a particular grain called teff to make something called injera. That's really nice. South Indian food, they often ferment rice and coconut together to make these appam pancake things that are really nice fermented food. So, that's on top of the obvious things like sauerkraut and kimchi and all the rest of it. So anytime that you can have fermented things, that's going to tend to be good to increase your body's natural probiotic level. And then, yeah, absolutely supplementing with some kind of appropriate probiotics can be really good as well. I like the ones that have the big selection of strains and have a guaranteed high level of bacteria actually in there. So I would certainly recommend those as well. Now, it's a little bit hit and miss. You know, a lot of the time you have a lot of stagnation there. Just say the good guys and the bad guys tend to fight. So you may well find that when you take it, that it doesn't agree with you. Some people just keep taking them anyway because they think they're good for them. But here's the thing: too much gas is almost worse for you than you know, just not having those probiotics. So yeah, you want to get it right. You want to find the type that's right for you. But I'll put my own recommendation below. Now, this might seem like an odd recommendation to a lot of people, but one of the most important things you can do is to upgrade your neurochemistry. What does that mean? It means to reduce your level of cortisol and to some degree as well norepinephrine, epinephrine, and to increase your level of serotonin, GABA, and oxytocin. So what on earth does that mean? Well, to put it another way, you could say to reduce your level of stress, anxiety, and feeling like you've always got to do something, like you can never stop, and increasing your level of calm confidence, which is serotonin, your level of zen-like peace and being unfazed by anything, which is GABA, and then your level of feeling connected to the world and the people around you and to yourself, which is oxytocin. So when you have optimal levels of those neurochemicals, your desire to overeat, eat the wrong foods, eat foods that are bad for you, eat at the wrong time of day, take drugs and do other things that are bad for you, all of that stuff just goes down to zero. Like, you don't want to do any of that if you already have good neurochemistry. You know, there's a term thrown around these days called self-medicate, right? When, you know, in the addiction community, right, we see different drugs or even addictions like gambling, sex addiction, whatever it may be, as ways of trying to avoid this bottomless pit of emptiness, this sadness, this whatever feelings we're trying to escape from, right? The despair, whatever it may be. But here's the thing: all of that is, you know, very useful, and sometimes it helps people, but a lot of the time it doesn't. And that philosophy, that mindset, that understanding, right? A lot of people who have addictions relapse. And the reason why they relapse, even with all the best intentions in the world and all the support and all the understanding, is because it's all very well to know theoretically that the thing that you're drawn to, that you're addicted to, is not going to be good for you long term, that it's a hollow, you know, pleasure, that it's only going to make you feel worse long term, and all the rest of it. All of that stuff is not really that useful if you haven't addressed the neurochemical deficiency that's at the base of it. Because, just to simplify things, if you're suffering because you have too much of the bad or the neurochemicals that feel bad, there's no such thing as a bad neurochemical, they all have value, but if you have too much of the neurochemicals that make you feel bad, like cortisol, and you don't have enough of the neurochemicals that make you feel good, like serotonin, then no matter what you do, you're always going to be suffering, basically. And here's the thing: it's very hard not to be hedonistic. It's very hard not to just do whatever feels good in the moment if you're suffering, right? Because if you feel good, you're like, oh, I don't want to do that thing because I don't want to ruin my feeling good. But if you're basically just suffering, it's like, okay, well, I'm already suffering. If I do this, I'm going to feel great for a while, and then I'm probably, although not definitely, right? If you're an optimist, maybe I feel great afterwards, but I'm probably going to feel worse afterwards. But you know what? Screw it. It's worth it. That's the basic. And I'm not saying that may not be something that you think consciously, but it's a calculation that's made at some level, right? Every time that you relapse and go back into doing these things that you know in theory are bad for you, but you do them anyway, right? And so this is absolutely crucial to the whole issue of intestinal stagnation. As I say, I've known people who've been in this world for years and decades, and they do fasting, they do everything that I recommend except for this, and for a while, But then, because they haven't resolved this, at some point they go back into, so they do an extensive purge mode, right? Or they do an extensive period of time being good, doing all the right things. But then, because they haven't resolved this, and they're like, oh God, life's so hard, and then something happens, they become too tired, too stressed, life becomes too difficult, the suffering becomes too much, and then they go back to the self-medicating, the thing that makes them feel better. Resolving your neurochemistry is the one thing that's going to really resolve this permanently. So this is a huge subject, and I'm not going to cover it all here. To find out more about that, you've got to click the video underneath. One of the top, again, I said this earlier about the oxygen breathing thing. This is one of the top 3 things that I've ever done for my health, my happiness, my success, my peace of mind. Everything good in my life has come from learning about this and addressing this thing. So it's super important. Highly recommend that you find out more about it, take action, and do it. Especially if you recognize that vicious circle that I'm talking about, all that up and down, that binge and purge, that addictive kind of cycle. And the addiction might be, heroin and crack and whatever, or it might just be, sabotaging yourself by, eating foods that other people might even feel good. Like, I used to eat these raw food desserts that were filled with like dried fruits and nuts. For most people, it'd be like, that's healthy, Owen. But for me, when I started binging on those and eating, like a whole cheesecake full of stuff, because I was so missing that oxytocin, missing that serotonin, which you get from the nuts, give the oxytocin boost, the creaminess, the sweets give the serotonin boost, right? To me, and it still sabotaged me. It still, made me feel heavy, made me feel bloated. It sabotaged my digestion, put a strain on my liver, put a strain on my pancreas, just set me back, right? So whatever it may be. And hey, I used to binge on drugs. I used to take alcohol and amphetamines and cannabis and this and that, right? So I've done the full gamut. I've done the really bad stuff and is that bad, Elwin stuff? Everything in between, but it's all the same thing. Right? It's all trying to make up for a neurochemical deficiency. Anyway, so at this point, it'd be really understandable if you're thinking something along the lines of, but Elwin, I watched this video because I wanted to find out about the intestines and the liver. You've barely talked about the liver. So here's the thing. First of all, this has been a super long video, and I'm going to cover the liver and gallbladder in part 2. So make sure we'll put a link underneath that as soon as it's available. Definitely check that video out. But here's the thing. If you feel disappointed, here's the thing to understand. 95% of what you can do for your liver is everything that we've already just covered. Why is that? Well, think about it. This is why I got the diagram out again. So you got this huge organ, right? Liver, one of the biggest organs in your body, biggest internal organ. It has so much to do, right? We've touched on the fact that it creates bile, which is necessary to emulsify fat, but that's really only scratching the surface, right? It deals with all these metabolic processes. Most of the hormones are dealt with and processed in the liver. It deals with most of the toxicity in the body, right? So here's the thing, if you have a toxin, if you take a toxin on purpose, like alcohol or something like that, right? Then your liver is the thing that's got to deal with it. 99% of the time, it's the liver that's got to deal with it. The liver's got to take it, it's got to render it into something that's less harmful, and then it's got to get it out of the body. But here's the thing. You've got to look after your liver hole, right? You know that hole that we all have around here in the right rib cage where the liver is, where the liver just shoots out all that toxicity that's been processing? Really? You don't have a liver hole? Well, none of us have a liver hole, right? This is the thing. So one of the main, the liver is an incredible, remarkably resilient organ, right? You can actually remove more than 50% of it and it will grow back again. It's an incredible thing. It's incredibly tough. It's built to deal with toxicity. It's tough as hell. But here's the thing. It doesn't have a hole. It doesn't have a way to eject the toxicity out of the body. What does it have? It has a gallbladder. And so what it does is the toxicity goes from the liver to the gallbladder, right? And then the gallbladder squirts it out into the duodenum, where it then gets into the small intestine, right? Here, but as we said, it's spread all over. then it gets into the large intestine, and then it gets out. So the main problem that the liver usually has to deal with is that all of this is blocked and stagnated, right? Especially the small intestine. And so the best thing you can do for your liver usually is to follow everything that I've said here to help to, first of all, clear out the large intestine. We covered that in the How to Resolve Constipation video. That's relatively simple. Then clear out the small intestine. That's what we've been talking about all throughout this video. Well, we talked about clearing it out and keeping it clear, right? Strategies for both of those things. If you do that, your liver is going to be so happy because it's going to be able to start dumping all its backlog of waste into there, which sometimes can make you feel worse rather than better. That's one of the reasons why when you do this, you often don't feel like totally great initially because you don't have any nerve endings inside your liver. So if you've got really toxic stuff inside your liver, you don't feel it, but then you release it into your small intestine and then you start to feel it. It's unpleasant. I've been doing a bunch of, as well as fasting, I'm doing a bunch of liver flushes and all the rest of it recently. It's been a while, it's been a couple of years, so I've been doing a phase of it. And yeah, it's pretty unpleasant, right? When the toxicity gets in the gallbladder, that's quite unpleasant. When it gets in the small intestine and the large intestine, it's very unpleasant. And it's very important to make sure that that area isn't blocked, right? A lot of people talk about doing liver flush, which we'll talk about in the part 2 of this video. But doing a liver flush, which is basically we are forcing the liver and gallbladder to spew out some of their toxicity, where's it going to go, right? It's still going to go in the same place. Now, if your small intestine is already overloaded with all the stagnation that's in it, then you add some really highly toxic stuff that your liver's been holding on to because it hasn't any other option. That's not a recipe for feeling great, right? That's actually going to make you feel worse than ever. So it's so important to do this clearing out of the small intestine first. So by all means, watch the second video straight away, but please do not do the techniques in that second video. Do not follow the recommendations in that second video in most cases without applying everything that you've learned in this video first. It's crucially important. Okay, I just want to end by saying thank you so much for watching, for bearing with me. I really appreciate it. I'd love to hear your feedback, right? Please share, please post underneath. Is there anything that I'm missing? Is there anything that you disagree with? Is there anything that you have followed my advice and what happened? Like, share your experiences. I'd love to hear about it. Especially if you have any questions, I'd love to get those. Also share it. Share it with anyone who will get it, right? Anyone who will appreciate it. If you're not already, subscribe to the channel, click on the notification bell so you get notified next time there's a new video. And I really strongly recommend do the follow-up, right? All the things that have resonated with you as, yes, these are things that were important. Check out the videos about them. Like, really immerse yourself in this work. I've really attempted to create here something that gives you everything that you could possibly need. And, you know, there's a collaborative process. That's why I say, if you think I'm missing anything, let me know underneath and I'll add something about it. But this is a complete system to give you everything that you need. So check out the other parts of the training. You know, if I try to do it all in one video, it'd be the longest video in the world, right? So that's why it's separated out, and there's some stuff maybe you already do and you already know about. So it's separated out into different segments. So, but everything that, you know, you're drawn to, everything you're interested in, check out, find out more about it, and then I'd love to see your feedback.